Ladies and gentlemen, breaking news. This is actually monumental, huge. You are with me on the front lines of history at this moment in time because the Supreme Court has just ruled on that Colorado ballot issue. You had states around the country trying to make sure that Donald Trump could not be on the ballot. He could not run for the United States presidency. And guess what? The Supreme Court made a massive decision here, a big decision to say that's not gonna fly. You're looking at a live picture of the Supreme Court that's coming to us courtesy of our friends over at AP. Thank you very much for joining the show. Welcome to the Trish Regan Show on this historic day. Really just incredible to see. We can get off the Supreme Court right now because we're actually waiting on Donald Trump. He is going to be speaking momentarily on all of this. So stay with me because we want to get straight to Trump in just a moment. You're watching the Trish Regan Show. I am Trish. We're brought to you as always by our friends over at LegacyPMInvestments.com. If you're interested in investing in gold, you want to diversify because you're worried about inflation, 1-866-589-0560. 1-866-589-0560. LegacyPMInvestments.com is their website. You're welcome to use my name, of course. We've got some very good friends over there, and I can promise they'll take good care of you. All right, so this is a big deal because what the Supreme Court just effectively said unanimously, ladies and gentlemen, 9-0, was that, you know what? Your states, just because you don't like a guy, you can't kick him off the ballot. It's not allowed. You can't do that. This is amazing, right? Because this is not even partisan. This is 9-0. A unanimous finding. So even though the likes of Whoopi Goldberg and a whole bunch of lefty extremists want to present this as some kind of political maneuver, I'm telling you here, listen to me, it's not. Because we've got liberal justices on that court as well. And this was a unanimous decision, 9-1. Whoopi, you're going to have to live with it. Watch her here as this news came in moments ago on The View.
Standing ovations, but we want you to be comfortable. The Supreme Court has just ruled unanimously that Colorado courts cannot keep you-know-who off the state's ballot for engaging in insurrection, finding that a state cannot make a call that could have a national impact on a federal election. Of course, unless it's about a woman's right to choose, but let's not get into that. What do you all think of this? I mean, is anybody surprised by this decision?
No. I actually think it was the right decision to make because it would have, if Colorado had been allowed to do that, we'd have this chaotic sort of process where you have 50 states and some are choosing to put him on the ballot and some are choosing not to put him on the ballot. So that's why this decision was unanimous in judgment. But if you read the dissent by Justices Sotomayor and Kagan and also Jackson, they are saying the Supreme Court went too far here because they answered a question that wasn't before them. The only question that was before this court was, can a state do this? Instead, what they did was they insulated all alleged insurrectionists from future challenges to their holding federal office. And it is a tenet of Supreme Court law. I am a Supreme Court bar admitted attorney. It says what it does today, the court should have left undone. And we always learn that in law school. The Supreme Court should just answer the question before it. And I had far too much hope that the court would be united in this and not overstep in favor of Donald Trump. And I think what we saw was a court where justices that behaved in a partisan manner, and that disappoints me.
Come on. Okay, so they want to make this all partisan. I'm sorry, it was 9-0. Okay, they unanimously decided that states cannot just go out on their own and say, you know what, I don't like this candidate, and therefore I'm not going to allow the American voters to vote for this candidate. Donald Trump celebrating this big win, saying it's a big win for America on his Truth Social. I mean, think of how insane, okay? Can we just say, think of how insane this was, that this even had to go to the Supreme Court. This is why I'm telling you, it's the little boy who cried wolf. After a while, people are like, come on, enough already. You keep trying, you keep trying, you keep trying. You're taking up our time. You're taking up our resources. You get the Supreme Court having to rule on this thing because you're all a bunch of freaking idiots. Okay, now I'm just getting mad. I am getting mad because we've been through this and through this and through this. I mean, we're dealing with it down in Fulton County, Georgia, where, you got a prosecutor who's hiring her boyfriend, allegedly. I mean, I don't know why you're texting 2,000 times with somebody who's not. These people, these leftist extremists that are trying to get in the way of what you should have every right to do, and that is to vote for the person that you believe is the person that you want to run this country. When they're starting to get in the way of that, they are getting in the way of the government for the people, by the people. And that is a big problem, ladies and gentlemen. Let's go over to MSNBC as they were reacting to this news as well in real time, and they're not too happy either. Take a peek.
And we do know some of the polling when you ask the voters about whether a conviction here would make a difference in their vote shows that, yes, that is something that could make their vote if Trump were criminally convicted as it relates to election interference in the 2020 election. Congresswoman Edwards, I should say, we're still months away, though, from the court hearing the decision and then ultimately making their ruling on the immunity claim brought by Trump. Oral arguments obviously already set. April 22nd, so about 6 weeks away. How big of an effect do you think the Supreme Court will have on the general election? This court having an influence on the 2024 election?
Well, I think this court is exactly where it doesn't want to be and doesn't need to be, and that is right in the middle of an election. Not since Bush v. Gore have we seen a court that's had this many opportunities to interfere in the election going forward. Look, that said, I think that this campaign is going to come down to whether voters want to choose somebody who either is facing criminal conviction or is convicted of a crime, and whether or not they want to preserve democracy. Those are really going to be the choices. And, my view is that at the end of the day, voters are going to say they don't want to return back to the chaos of Donald Trump, to him undermining the rule of law and possibly being convicted of a crime going into an inauguration. I think voters are going to be very clear about that.
All right, I want to go over right now to, let's see if we can take this live feed coming into us. Drew, you are up, man, because we're going to be hearing directly from the president. Let's go over to Right Side Broadcasting, our friends there that have a live picture coming to us at Mar-a-Lago. Drew, wondering if you can do that for us right now. We get a little bit of music coming in, I think. Is that coming from the feed there, or is that coming from AP? Or I'm gonna rely on Drew because he's gonna text me just exactly the picture that we're looking at. We want to make sure we give our friends credit. I think this is Right Side Broadcasting that has that. There we go. Okay, yeah, it's RSBN. So they're going to be carrying this momentarily. You can see there a live picture at Mar-a-Lago, and Donald Trump's like, woohoo! I mean, this is major, ladies and gentlemen. As I said, this is historic. But why are we in this position to begin with? Thank you very much. I mean, come on. It shouldn't have come to this. I mean, Jack Smith, buddy, what was going on? What was going on? All of them. Fannie Willis, Jack Smith, Letitia James. That one's going to the appellate court now. Imagine this. The guy's getting hit with a $500 million that he's got to pay to New York City in the interim as he waits for the appellate court. I mean, what has happened to this country? I realize you can't stand the guy, all right? I realize he's upending everything you've ever worked for, all the little systems that you put in place there, and changing things on the fly. But it is what it is. It is what it is. And you know what? If he gets elected, it's because the people want him. I'm going to just ask, could you do me a favor, Drew? Can you maybe just mute the music that's coming in on that live feed if it's possible? And then when we see the president, we'll go straight to his, you guys have seen how the sausage gets made here in this live stream. If you have not, make sure that you subscribe. Make sure that you indeed give it thumbs up, and make sure that you share, and comment. But let's get that music muted so it doesn't distract people right now. Anyway, again, the former president is going to be speaking on this. Let me share with you just some news, as I said, from the actual decision here. And this is pretty incredible here. They write, states may not unilaterally disqualify Donald Trump from the ballot. These are the justices. The judgment, and this is coming to us actually courtesy this little printout of Daily Mail. We are just blown away by this. The judgment of the Colorado Supreme Court is reversed. Responsibility for enforcing Section 3 against federal office holders and candidates rests with Congress and not the states. Pretty amazing. Again, we need to lose the music. I hope that you guys aren't hearing all of that coming through. But states have no power under the Constitution to enforce Section 3 with respect to federal offices, especially the presidency. The justices also issued a general warning against trying to pursue the insurrection clause against Trump after the election. They wrote, the disruption would be all the more acute and could nullify the votes of millions and change the election result if Section 3 enforcement were attempted after the nation has voted. In a statement, the Colorado Republican Party told Daily Mail, we applaud the Supreme Court for unanimously ruling against the petitioners and their ridiculous attempt to engage in election interference by unconstitutionally removing Donald J. Trump from the ballot. Wow. Pretty amazing to see. We've got more, I think that we've got a few more comments that came to us there. As you can see, as this ruling came out, states may not unilaterally disqualify Donald Trump. Responsibility, as we said, for enforcing Section 3 against federal office holders and candidates rests with Congress and not the states. The judgment of the Colorado Supreme Court, therefore, cannot stand. All 9 members of the court agree with that result. It's just really incredible that it has to come to this, right? Constitutionally, it's not there because they added, because the Constitution makes Congress rather than the states responsible for enforcing Section 3 against federal officers, office holders, and candidates. We reverse. Nothing in the Constitution requires that they endure such chaos. Really, truly incredible stuff right now. Again, ladies and gentlemen, this is massive. Donald Trump expected to speak soon. If we look at that live picture coming to us from Mar-a-Lago right now, we are awaiting him. And he will be addressing the public. This is on the YouTube feed, actually, of RSBN, and it's from Mar-a-Lago. Again, this is a pretty darn big deal. This is what you would call historic, absolutely historic. And the left does not like it. Not one single bit. We're just, again, trying to pull up this feed. And as I said, he's going to be coming. He said he was going to speak at 12. He's usually not late. He's usually quite prompt. So it's a little after noon, and we'll see. I guess he's got the crowd waiting here, but now I see the lights getting turned up, and we will see what he has to say. I think he's going to feel pretty good and pretty victorious, but there's just been so much that's happening, right, ladies and gentlemen, over the last however many months. And it's very interesting that they have kept it all sort of geared towards this moment in time. This is why he gets back to how this is election interference. In other words, you don't just come out of thin air and say, hey, we're going to decide to do this now at this moment in time. You know, that really does smack of some kind of problem. I mean, hey, James Comey didn't even go after, do you remember that? Didn't even bother going after Hillary Clinton when he could have, probably when he should have, because he was worried about election interference. And that is in fact what we're seeing possibly right now, potential election interference. And so we want to hear from the former president himself directly. I can tell you, when I heard the questioning, remember when we were listening to the questioning, it was absolutely fascinating. And we heard from all those different justices, and every single one of them was really troubled by this. They were like, exactly where are you getting your power? And you had some Oh, I could say some things, but I won't. A little lawyer out there in Colorado who works for a little Colorado firm. I think he did go to Harvard, though. And he was trying to explain away, and they were like, yeah, this isn't really making sense. And it was sort of funny. It was sort of amusing to hear how he was defending this. They're like, you don't get your power this way. Like this, there's no way that Colorado can make this decision. And then you had Maine try and do the same thing. And then just the other day, Illinois is like, hey, we don't want them either. Keep them off the ballot. Wow. I mean, look, it's all the more reason why I'm going to give a quick plug for one of our sponsors here, because I'm telling you, we need policies in place that are actually going to help our country and do the right thing for our country. I want to just give a shout out to our friends over at Job Creators Network. We got the jobs report coming out incidentally this week on Friday. Alfredo Ortiz is going to be on the program later this week. I just want to tell you guys about this great organization, because they're looking out for how to protect small business owners, how to protect growth in the economy, how to protect prosperity, because these are issues that are increasingly becoming harder and harder to come by with all this inflation and then all this red tape and heck, legal hurdles like what you're seeing in the city of New York with Letitia James. I mean, can you imagine any business owner is thinking twice right now about whether they want to be in New York? Because, hey, you're on the wrong side of a political issue and they can go right after you. I mean, think about how politicized the system is getting. This is why it's so important that we have organizations like our good friends over at Job Creators Network that are really looking out for everyday Americans. Everyday Americans, it matters, right? Join JCN.com. I want you to join their network because they're going to look out for you. You're going to look out for them. Everybody together is really going to help make an effort to try and preserve this wonderful economy that we have had, that we've grown up with, and that we want to keep, right? We really, really need to keep. As I said, Alfredo will be on the show later this week, so we can ask him some more questions about jobs, about inflation, which are clearly an issue. As we wait, ladies and gentlemen, on the former president of the United States, who's going to be speaking there at Mar-a-Lago, this is just really a moment in time. You with me, we are on the front lines of history. I say that and I want to just underline it and I want to highlight it because this has never been done before. I mean, heck, you never had a president impeached twice before either. It's like one thing after another. Is it really that scary to them? Are they that worried about Donald Trump coming in? I think they are. I think they are because, he just doesn't play by the same system of rules. And if he has a reaction to something and wants to get something done, you know what? He's operating like a CEO would. And he's like, okay, boom, 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 boom. And that's not how government works, right? Government is consensus and bureaucracy. And he's like, forget it. Boom, I want this. I mean, think about, I know some of you aren't such a fan of the vaccine, but I remember talking to him when he was trying to get that vaccine in. He actually called me when I left Fox and then called me at home the next day. And he's like, what's going on? Blah, blah, blah. This is crazy. I know. We had a good conversation about it. And then he's like, okay, I got to get back to getting this vaccine done. And he was all systems go. And his goal was to remove all that red tape so that we could actually get that out into the marketplace. And that is sort of the personality, if you would, of a business owner. A business owner cares about getting stuff done as opposed to getting all the consensus and everybody's buy-in. And then, so this is the problem at State Department, right? Because state had a view on the world and that view has been perpetuated, frankly, going back to, you can credit, at least when it comes to Ukraine, Dick Cheney, because he was the first to come up with that brilliant idea that we should expand NATO. I mean, everybody was like looking at each other, like twiddling their thumbs. Well, what do we do? The Cold War's over. That ends in November 1989 under Reagan. Dick Cheney was head of defense at that point. And so he had this idea that you just expand NATO because, Russia someday is going to be a big problem again. And at the time, even the Secretary of State under Reagan kind of laughed about it. I mean, everybody thought it was a little bit much, a little bit silly. Well, then fast forward, Dick Cheney's plan, which actually got leaked to the Times around 1992, it gets resurrected courtesy of Bill Clinton. So you go into the 90s now, and you've got Bill Clinton ramping up NATO. Well, you know who's happy about that? All those big military industrial complex companies that had nothing to do, right? You know, what are they going to do? What about the whole State Department and their spy network, this, that, and the other? I mean, everybody was gainfully employed, and suddenly you get no Cold War. So now everybody had a purpose again. And so NATO got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. I've talked to you about George Kennan, who is the former diplomat for the U.S. to the Soviet Union during the height of the Cold War. And he's like, what are you guys doing? Seriously, what are you doing? Because this is just going to result in getting you right back where you were. And they didn't care. They took NATO from 17 countries to some 30 that we have today. And now this is the mandate, right? We learned just last weekend that the CIA has had a special op in Ukraine since 2014. And so you wonder why Putin's like, ugh. Now, this is not a defense of Putin in any way, but let's be realistic. You can understand why another country, and Kennan predicted this would happen, would be really threatened by the idea of the CIA having an operation going on right on their border. And this has been going on since 2014, since the Maidan Revolution. That's that. And now we fast forward to today, where you get yourself into a giant mess. So when Donald Trump comes out and says, you know what? I don't really think we need to be putting this much money into NATO, especially when NATO doesn't pay its fair share. You know, you're supposed to pay, 2% of GDP, and they're not really doing that. So consequently, he is a problem. He is a problem for them. And he'll continue to be a problem for them as they see it, which may, in fact, be why they did everything they can. I mean, let's go back for a moment as we wait for Donald Trump. Again, if you're just joining us, subscribe, like, comment. I'm looking at your comments here in real time. This is a live show. We're waiting on Donald Trump, who's going to be speaking from Mar-a-Lago in just a moment. So again, major news coming out today. Historic news. The Supreme Court deciding unanimously, as by the way, I predicted they would, unanimously, that you can't do that, Colorado. You can't just call the shots. I mean, this is crazy that it had to come to this, but indeed, this is where we are, ladies and gentlemen, today. Indeed. So as we wait for President Trump, I just want to again point out why he is so problematic for the establishment. Look, you know, he says some things. Sometimes he gets himself in a little bit of trouble. He kind of has a sense of humor that doesn't always work for everybody. And, you know, if you lash out at him, he's lashing out 30 times worse, and he's doing it in public. Like, he does it to your face. It was one of the interesting things about how he treated the media. You compare and contrast, say, that with Barack Obama. I remember once as a young reporter when Barack Obama was first running for the presidency. And I was a reporter at a major network. I was out covering his campaign, and he was coming off the stage. And I asked a question. I threw a microphone in his face, and I asked a question. And this handler got so mad at me. This guy over on the side, he came up, he grabbed me, and he shouted in my face just because I did that. I was never going to get an interview with Barack Obama. And I was like, whoa, buddy, like, calm down. You know, I don't even think it was a tough question. But the difference between, say, a Barack Obama and a Donald Trump was, if Barack Obama didn't like your question, he might punt, he might do something, and then you would hear from it. His staff, right? They'd be all over you. Whereas Donald Trump would actually tell you to your face, I really don't like that question. I think that's a stupid question. Or I mean, he actually was very forthcoming with reporters. And while everybody had a problem with that, it was sort of what you see is what you get. You know, he's still the kid from Queens that's just going to call it like it is and tell it like it is, for better or for worse. And sometimes for him, it wound up being for worse because people would get upset and say it's not presidential, this, that, and the other. But I think, as so many people have lately said, hey, you know, I'll take a few mean tweets over the alternative being just a really miserable economic, political, and border situation. It's really just incredible to see. I was looking at some of the numbers that had just been put out. There was an interesting graphic that actually Daily Mail had on the extraordinary rise in the number of people that are coming illegally into the country and they're being apprehended each month. We now know, of course, more than 300,000 just in the month of December alone. It came down a little bit in January, but not enough to really make any kind of a difference. You now have communities all across the country saying, we can't do this, we can't handle this. New York City saying, how can we be a sanctuary city anymore? Because we don't have the resources to confront this. And Joe Biden and the entire Democrat Party ran under this thesis that somehow it would be nice, we just hold hands, kumbaya, like we are a nation of immigrants, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Sure, we are. We are. My own ancestors, all immigrants from Ireland. Listen, that is who we are. But it was a different time, and you came in the proper way. And you know what? Back then, there were no sort of nets, safety nets. And I'm not saying that that's right, but you had to rely on family. You had to rely on community. There was no government to give you an ATM card, a debit card. Here you go. We're going to load this thing up with cash. There were no hotels to stay in, and there were no free cell phones. So very, very different time. And perhaps the answer is we've got to actually just enforce the border like every other country does. You enforce the border and you say, hey, you know what? We're going to make an articulated, thoughtful decision on who it is that we want here in this country. Hey, you're allowed in because we need nurses right now. And it doesn't, by the way, not everybody has to be educated. Let me be very, very clear on this. We're going to let you and you and you in because we need workers that are willing to do all these jobs. And so that's ultimately the direction that we have to head in. It's got to be a massive overhaul. You can't tie it to the Ukraine funding. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. You can't tie it to Israel or anything else. You've got to kind of just say, okay, we're going to look at this border issue in and of itself. We are going to put up a wall, right? I mean, to think that Biden's tearing down the wall and he was so proud of that. And then he sends Kamala Harris down to the border, who's going to discover the root causes of all the problems, right? No. It was just one thing after another, if you ask me, a total disaster. And so, again, as we wait on President Trump, who is about to speak, you've got to say to yourself, so what is it that was ultimately the real issue, the real sticking point, the real scary thing about him? And I think that it's that he was willing to call out the status quo. He was willing to change things. I mean, think about it. He sent a nice note to Kim Jong-il. Like, these are things that never happened before. And he was very interested in kind of having this one-on-one approach. Now, on the one hand, sure, it can get you in trouble. It can cause other kinds of unanticipated challenges. But I think people are looking at it now and saying, well, how much trouble could it really be? Because look at the trouble that we're in now. Look at the problems that we have with our economy. $43 trillion worth of debt and still counting. Right? That is just absolutely unthinkable. 43 trillion and still counting. You look at the inflation that we're suffering from. Some friends of mine over at the Committee to Unleash Prosperity did an analysis, and what they found was that we're upwards of 18% inflation right now. 18%. A lot of this has to do, of course, with energy prices, which affect everything. It cracks me up when they try and strip food and energy. And they're like, okay, let's look at core CPI, which, by the way, is going up too. But when you strip out food and energy, ladies and gentlemen, you are still right now left with massive inflation. But even if you weren't, you know what? Food and energy, those are the things that people really, really need. And so if those prices are going up, it's inevitable that all the prices in the economy go up. When the Biden administration tries to say, oh, Bidenomics is working and, it's getting better and inflation's coming down. No. Let's talk about where we were in 2020 and where we are now. So they got this thing up to nearly 10% that you were paying in terms of higher consumer prices. And so even if it comes down and it's up, 3% or up 2.5% now. Look, it's a greater range to be in. I'll take it any day of the week. But don't forget how high they sent us. So realistically, you are looking at prices overall being up 18% from where they were. I mean, that puts us right back in Jimmy Carter territory. I told you it would be Carter 2.0. It really and truly is in more ways than one. So we've got a messed up economy. You look at the spread differential in terms of what people think about Joe Biden versus Donald Trump on the economy, and you got like 20-point spreads in those polls. So that's a pretty big deal. Donald Trump expected to speak momentarily. We're going to be going live to Mar-a-Lago, everyone, but I just am highlighting why people are sick and tired of what they've been up against. And they've been up against a lot in terms of our economy, in terms of the border, and in terms of their fear about what kind of conflict is coming down the road. It's one of the reasons why, let me give a plug for our very good friends over at AFP as well. Their effort at AFP is to really and truly work on some of these policies so that they protect you from the inflation we're dealing with. AmericansForProsperity.org. I would really encourage you guys to go check them out right now, because Americans for Prosperity is committed to making sure that we get the right kinds of economic policies. Yeah, you know what? Policy matters. I'm sorry. It really, really matters. We want the right kinds of economic policies. This is sort of like not that hard to do. And yet, for some reason, this administration just keeps on goofing it up. I mean, for goodness sakes, look at who they put in as Energy Secretary, Jennifer Granholm, who gets asked a simple question like, what's your Granholm plan? Get it? Play on grand. For reducing energy prices. She did this on Bloomberg Television. My friend Tom Keene asked her the question. She started laughing like a hyena. I'm like, wait a second. You are the Energy Secretary of the United States of America. And then she had that brilliant quote where she's like, well, everybody can just get an EV. Well, no, not everybody can just get an EV. And by the way, if they do, then you're putting a lot of pressure on the grid system and electricity, which is a whole other environmental challenge. Not to mention, you need a lot of lithium mines, which do their other issues for in terms of devastating the environment. I mean, none of this is easy. They're trying to make it easy. And I question why. Like, what is in it for them to push these various things so hard? Americans for Prosperity, they're pretty simple. You know what's in it for them? Lower energy prices for Americans, lower inflation for Americans, so that we can all have a chance at growing this economy together. Again, if you're just joining us here live on the Trish Regan Show, we are waiting on President Trump. He's expected to speak momentarily there at Mar-a-Lago, and it's a big day for him. He's pretty darn excited. He was out on Truth Social just moments ago, emphasizing that this is a huge win. It is a huge win because, I mean, I thought it would be, but you never know sometimes. Supreme Court restoring Trump's ballot eligibility, now leading on the Wall Street Journal. It was really kind of amazing to me at first because I was looking through all the mainstream media and I'm like, where are they covering this? Like, this is kind of a big story, right? And I wasn't finding it everywhere. It kind of shocked me. Let's see if we go over to the New York Times right now, if they are leading with it. They should. This is clearly historic, but they were a little slow on the uptick. You know, maybe they didn't really like what they were seeing. And that is to be expected, right? That is to be expected with some of these places. I'll tell you, unbelievable. Again, we're waiting on President Trump. This is just absolutely historic. And we are living through history on the front lines of history. You can tell your kids, I remember the day that the Supreme Court had to remind the politicians in this country that you cannot just decide who's going to be on the ballot and who's not based on who you want. I mean, think about the implications of that. We want to thank our good friends over at RSBN, because they are bringing this to us live. I'm not sure as AP has the feed right now. They did have the feed earlier in the day as we were watching. Let's take a quick peek. As we were watching for the announcement, they did have a camera stationed outside. And let's see if they are also taking, I'm going to go over and check it in real time as we look to see who is covering this. Again, this is not necessarily what they want to be covering right now, right? You know that. I know that. None of the mainstream media appreciates what they're hearing right now. It's one of the reasons why you're hearing sort of this disappointment disappointment, if you would. Anyway, yes, AP does have this as well. Drew, if you want to take a look right there, Trump is addressing the media after Supreme Court restores the former president to the ballot. So Associated Press is going to be taking this as well. They have a live picture coming in. And this is, as I said, this is just a historic, monumental day. And I'm very anxious to hear what the president says. I think he's going to be pretty darn happy. I imagine he's consulting with some of his lawyers right now as they sort of figure out and formulate a reaction to this. But it's pretty obvious. It's pretty simple. And knowing him, he doesn't really need any prep. But it's just incredible that we had to go through all of this. I'm reading from the ruling right now. This case raises the question whether the states, in addition to Congress, may also enforce Section 3. We conclude that states may disqualify persons holding or attempting to hold state office, but states have no power under the Constitution to enforce Section 3 with respect to the federal offices, especially the presidency. In other words, hey, Colorado, you do you, and the federal government will do the federal government. Colorado, you don't have the right to prevent America from electing the next president of the United States because you don't like him. Nor do you have the right to prevent your citizens, they are governed by federal law in this case, to be able to say, hey, you know what? We want to vote for Donald Trump. It's really incredible that it had to come to this. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, okay? But it's kind of just a common sense reaction, a gut reaction. I mean, think of the chaos that you would have in this country if everyone could suddenly just say, hey, you know what? We're going to do whatever we want. So Donald Trump is going to be addressing America live there from Mar-a-Lago. Mar-a-Lago, which, by the way, has just gone up in its real estate value. Incidentally, Letitia James, are you listening up? So there was a big article actually in Forbes over the weekend talking about how prices throughout Florida have been going up and away, but specifically in the Palm Beach area. So I was sort of amused by that because, you know, Letitia wants to decide just exactly how much something like Mar-a-Lago is actually worth. And reality, or realistically speaking, again, it doesn't make any sense. That is government intervention. In some ways, you could kind of equate it with Colorado, the local government trying to take on too much power. And that is just what we have seen over and over and over again. I want to share with you right now just some results of a new Gallup poll that came out recently. Americans most likely to say that immigration is the most important problem in the country right now. 28% of Americans actually are saying that immigration is the biggest issue. This is in February of 2024. You know what's amazing to me? In January of 2024, so like 4 weeks prior, only 20% of the country said that immigration was the number one issue. But then you go on down and you've got government as the second biggest issue. Now that's kind of a broad sort of category, if you would. But I have a feeling that has to do with the overstep of government, right? Which is what we effectively are seeing with Letitia James and what we saw in Colorado and what we saw in Maine and what we saw in Illinois. If all of these local governments can suddenly make these wild decisions that they are going to decide, hey, you know what? We don't want this particular man or woman on our ballot, and they have the right to do that. Well, that would kind of threaten the entire system. But can you believe that it had to go this far? I mean, I'm just curious what you guys think. I'm going to get to some of your comments here as we await Donald Trump, who's got some big news and a big victory, I think, to really make clear to everyone. It should not have had, I mean, you think about the resources, frankly, that are being wasted. And it keeps happening with him. I mean, think of the resources that were wasted, with the Steele dossier. I mean, that was an enormous waste. And what's incredible there is that somehow nobody was ever really penalized for that. I'm always surprised because that was a whole bunch of hocus pocus. And it's really just incredible. It's, Dennis making the point that it is the Washington swamp and that the swamp is really just in full action. And it's I agree with you. I just find it appalling, truly appalling that they're getting away with all this. And yet, because we're in such an insanely politicized environment, you still have so many people on the left trying to blame now the court. It's the court's problem. It's the court that is so politicized. We were just watching this from Whoopi Goldberg, who's having to deal with this major news. And then Sunny, her little sidekick there, who I didn't realize apparently has a legal background, kind of trying to talk out of both sides of her mouth, saying, well, I understand this. But then she was like, I don't know if the producer was in her ear and saying, hey, that's not... You're not playing to your crowd. Then she started to do this like wild turn where she said, oh, but really this court is just so highly, highly political. Drew, as we wait on President Trump, and Drew and I both have an eye on Associated Press, so we will make sure. But I would like to play that again for the viewers so that they can see how, you've got these commentators reacting in real time, and they're really not sure what to think. They just don't like that the Supreme Court is not siding with Colorado in this case.
Standing ovations, but we want you to be comfortable. The Supreme Court has just ruled unanimously that Colorado courts cannot keep you-know-who off the state's ballot for engaging in insurrection, finding that a state cannot make a call that could have a national impact on a federal election. Of course, unless it's about a woman's right to choose, but let's not get into that. What do you all think of this? I mean, is anybody surprised by this decision?
No, I actually think it was the right decision to make, because it would have, if Colorado had been allowed to do that, we'd have this chaotic sort of process where you have 50 states and some are choosing to put him on the ballot and some are choosing not to put him on the ballot. So that's why this decision was unanimous in judgment. But if you read the dissent by Justices Sotomayor and Kagan and also Jackson, they are saying the Supreme Court went too far here because they answered a question that wasn't before them. The only question that
it was unanimous. We've got another piece of sound that is just coming into us. And of course, Colorado, they're all worked up. The Colorado Secretary of State, Griswold, who was so proud of herself, just patting herself on the back because she was the one who created this entire mess in the beginning. She's out there saying the Supreme Court has issued bad decisions on democracy. Are you kidding me, lady? I've got to play this one for you. Drew, I just sent it. I wonder if you can pull it up. He's going to see if we can get that for you again as we wait on Donald Trump here, who is going to take a very big victory lap, as he well deserves, and he should. And I'm telling you guys, you know what? All this does is help him even more. Every single time they go after him like this, every stinking time, you know what? The polls move higher. The polls move higher because Americans say, you guys have nothing. You keep trying and trying and trying, and it makes them very suspicious of why they're trying so hard. I mean, why is it? I mean, can you imagine if this were anyone else? I mean, all the things that they've tried to go after him with. I mean, where there's smoke, there's fire on the Joe Biden side, in my estimation. But here they keep trying to come up with smoke. They're like trying to create smoke, to think with Letitia James that she's like, oh, I don't really think Mar-a-Lago is worth that. And therefore, because we believe that you lied about the valuation of your home in a private transaction with a bank, we're going to go after you and we're going to charge you $500 million. This is how outrageous it is. Anyway, if Drew has that sound, again, just coming into us, this is the Colorado Secretary of State. I would love to play that for you because this is really fascinating to see. She is so moronic, or shall we say selfish, self-absorbed, narcissistic, to think that she can actually set the stage for everyone else. I mean, that she can actually call the shots for the rest of the country. I mean, that is unbelievable, is it not? Do we have it, Drew? If so, let's give it a whirl. Okay, maybe not. Maybe he's still working on that one, but it is sent over to you, buddy, and I would love to play that for everyone because I think that it's really pretty darn compelling stuff to see. For sure. again, as we wait on Donald Trump, ladies and gentlemen, you can see everybody's starting to weigh in. And this is sent over to our production note in the rundown. The woman who is Jenna Griswold is the Secretary of State there who brought this all forward for Donald Trump in the beginning. And this is incredible to me that she would be so narcissistic as to actually think that she had the right as Colorado to make a decision for the entire rest of the country. Come on, please. It's really kind of nauseating to think about. These are people who are very, very self-absorbed. And I hate to make this general characterization, but sometimes it feels like it's just something that happens with the left in general, right? The left in general. Let's see if we can reach out to Drew, make sure everything's okay. Okay, he cannot do this on the live, only this. Okay, so we'll have to wait on that one. It's too bad I can't actually throw it up for you, but I don't think that's possible. Anyway, he is getting in a second. Okay, so what do you know? But I think it's worth seeing because you have to understand sort of and understand their mindset, if you would, right? Their mindset is such that they are in charge, they are running the show, and that is a mindset that I think is so fundamentally flawed and indicative of who they are, really, overall. I mean, it's bizarre. And I will just quote again from the actual opinion because these justices made it very, very clear. I mean, this was so insane for them to even be going down this path to begin with. States may not unilaterally disqualify Donald Trump from the ballot. The judgment of the Colorado Supreme Court is reversed responsibility for enforcing Section 3 against federal office holders and candidates rests with Congress and not the states. The judgment of the Colorado Supreme Court therefore cannot stand. All 9 members of the
president, and not immunity for me, but for any president. If a president doesn't have full immunity, you really don't have a president because nobody that is serving in that office will have the courage to make, in many cases, what would be the right decision, or it could be the wrong decision. It could be, in some cases, the wrong decision, but they have to make decisions, and they have to make them free of all terror that can be rained upon them when they leave office or even before they leave office. And some decisions are very tough. I can tell you that as a president, that some decisions to make are very tough. I took out ISIS, and I took out some very big people from the standpoint of a different part of the world. 2 of the leading terrorists, probably the 2 leading terrorists ever that we've ever seen in this world. And those are big decisions. I don't want to be prosecuted for it. Another president wouldn't want to be prosecuted for it. It had a tremendously positive impact. It stopped everything cold. And sometimes you have to make, they were tough decisions. Sometimes you have to make decisions like that. When you make a decision, you don't want to have your opposing party or opponent or even somebody that just thinks you're wrong bring a criminal suit against you or any kind of a suit when you leave office. I have that right now at a level that nobody's ever seen before. I have rogue prosecutors and I have rogue judges. I have judges that are out of control. And it's a very unfair thing for me, but serving perhaps as a sample to others of what should not be happening when you make good decisions. And in my case, the economy was great. We didn't go into any wars. We totally defeated ISIS. We provided the largest tax cuts in history. We provided the largest regulation cuts in history. But think of it, no wars. We beat ISIS 100% of the caliphate. And there were no wars. We did a job that was great, but maybe I wouldn't have done that. The caliphate, defeating them, was very powerful. It was going to take 4 years. It took me 4 months. But it was a very strong dictum that I gave. I said, get them, defeat them, end it. We were fighting for 20 years against ISIS, and we did it very quickly. I don't want to be prosecuted. In that case, it worked out very well. There will be some things that perhaps don't work out so well, but I don't want to be prosecuted because I decided to do something that is very much for the good of the country and actually for the good of the world. A president shouldn't have that on his mind, and he has to have a free and clear mind when he makes very big decisions, or it's going to be nothing more than a ceremonial post. You'll be president, it'll be a wonderful thing, and you won't do anything because you don't want to be hit by your opponent or hit by somebody else, because who wants to leave office and go through what I've gone through? I'm being prosecuted by Biden, my opponent, because every one of these things, whether it's Fannie Willis or Bragg, these are local and state, but they're in total coordination with the White House. You can't do that. It shouldn't be done. I mean, a thing like that. In the case of the DA's office, they put one of the top people, maybe the second person, in the Manhattan DA's office to get Trump. They had a Hillary Clinton lawyer leave the law firm, very prestigious big law firm, leave the law firm to go into the DA's office to get Trump, Pomerantz, Mr. Pomerantz. So he goes in to become a prosecutor, worked for the Democrat Party and Hillary Clinton, goes in to prosecute Donald Trump at a local level, in total coordination with the Department of Justice, meaning Biden. And then you have the Fannie Willis, or as she would say, Fani, F-A-N-I, but Fani. And she hired somebody, knew the person long before this horrible prosecution took place. And she went out and she paid him an unbelievable amount of money, more money than he ever had dreamt possible. Much more money than other people that do that for a living. He never did it at all, had no experience in it at all. And they had obviously a conflict. We don't have to go into that, but they were able to get a lot of money because it was a high-profile person. Me, I'm a very high-profile person. So they were able to pay him close to $1 million when he was not equipped to do the job, and she's not equipped to do the job, and that case should end immediately. That case is so conflicted, nobody's ever seen anything like it. And then you have deranged Jack Smith, who's a Trump hater and represents all the Trump haters, and he's going wild. He's just a wild man. He's been overturned unanimously by the Supreme Court. Went after other people over the years. He's had great failure, but he's mean, he's nasty, he's unfair, and the judges on these cases, they're all Trump haters, other than we have maybe one or two that I think can be fair. But you look at New York, what's happened. I mean, these people have tremendous hatred. You can't do this to a president. And again, I'm not talking about me, I'm talking about in the future. A president has to be free. A president has to be, if the president does a good job, I did. Some people would say a great job. But if the president does a good job, a president should be free and clear and frankly celebrated for having done a good job. Not indicted 4 times and not gone after on a civil basis, and not demanded to pay hundreds of millions of dollars in fines on something that was absolutely perfect, where there were no victims, where the financial statements were absolutely flawless, where you have disclaimer clauses. I mean, nobody's ever had a thing like this. I wasn't given a jury, and I had a clubhouse judge just come up with this number on a perfect loan and very conservative financial statements. But even at that, if you look, the disclaimer says don't rely on the financial statements in any way, shape, or form. Go out and do your own work. The bank in question had the most sophisticated lawyers in the world, frankly, one of the top law firms anywhere in the country, and they can defend themselves. What guys like Bragg and Letitia James and Fani and deranged Jack Smith, what they should be doing is fighting violent crime. And that would lead me to the end. I will say that President Biden, number one, stop weaponization. Fight your fight yourself. Don't use prosecutors and judges to go after your opponent, to try and damage your opponent so you can win an election. Our country is much bigger than that. The other thing I say to President Biden, close the borders now. This is not sustainable for our country. It's not sustainable for our cities. Our country is under siege. This is a violent thing that you've done, and many people are dying. Many, many people are dying. They die on the trip up, they die going through the border, and they die in our country. But many of the people coming up are from prisons and jails, from mental institutions and insane asylums. Many are terrorists. You see it. Many, many are terrorists. And I believe the real number that we have right now is probably closer to 15 million people. And by the time the term ends, I believe the president's term ends, I believe you'll be at close to 20 million people. That's almost larger than any state in the union. Our country, it is not sustainable. Many of these people are tough. Many of these people are bad. They come from some of the roughest countries in the world and some of the roughest prisons. We have prisons in the Congo, in Africa, coming. We have people coming from all parts of the Middle East. They're coming from Yemen, and yet you are bombing Yemen. You have to stop. You have to close the border. You have absolute authorization. You don't need Congress. I had the safest border in the history of our country, and I didn't use Congress for it. And then I built hundreds of miles of wall, and the reason I built it and how I built it was I considered it an invasion of our country, and I took the money from the military, and the Army Corps of Engineers did it with me, and we did a great job. And we had the safest border we've ever had, and now we have the most unsafe border anywhere in the world at any time. There's never been a border like this at any country, anywhere in the world. They would have fought with sticks and stones to stop the horrible situation that's occurring. Our people can't stand it, and the people coming in really can't stand it because they're dying. Many are dying on the trip up, and they're dying in the country. And also, many of the people are criminals, and they're doing tremendous harm. I call it migrant crime. It's migrant crime. It's a new category of crime. They're hurting our country horribly, and we've become a laughing stock all over the world. So I say respectfully to President Biden, you have the authorization right now. I did it. I didn't go to Congress and say, do I have the right to close? I fought Congress on it. Close the borders. You can do it right now. You have everything. Use my policies. My policies were great. Everybody said it. Use my policies. So just to finish, I have great respect for the Supreme Court, and I want to just thank them for working so quickly and so diligently and so brilliantly. And again, this is a unifying factor. Everybody now is together, and they can go after me as a politician. They can go after me with votes, but they're not going to go after me with that kind of lawsuit that takes somebody out of a race who's leading in this case, but even if the person wasn't leading. And I want to thank you all for being here. Do we have any questions? Yes.
Mr. President, the poll numbers are massive for you going into Super Tuesday. We found that a lot of people that were agnostic to politics in general see these legal cases against you. They see how life was back under a Trump administration. Do you think that's the key to pull some of these independent voters into this next election, seeing that these legal cases are unfair, they have no merit, and also the poll numbers and their life before Trump?
It's such an interesting question because historically a thing like what I've been...
You too. I pulled conversion and retention targets out of the hat. You magicians?
Respect for the Supreme Court, and I want to just thank them for working so quickly and so diligently and so brilliantly. And again, this is a unifying factor. Everybody now is together, and they can go after me as a politician. They can go after me with votes, but they're not going to go after me with that kind of lawsuit that takes somebody out of a race who's leading in this case, but even if the person wasn't leading. And I want to thank you all for being here. Do we have any questions?
Yes. Mr. President, the poll numbers are massive for you going into Super Tuesday. We found that a lot of people that were agnostic to politics in general see these legal cases against you. They see how life was back under a Trump administration. Do you think that's the key to pull some of these independent voters into this next election, seeing that these legal cases are unfair, they have no merit, and also the poll numbers and their life before Trump?
It's such an interesting question because historically a thing like what I've been going through would have hurt a political party or a political candidate terrifically. You wouldn't even run. You wouldn't be able to run. You'd get out. This has happened over many years, many times. In this case, the polls show that I'm much more popular than I was before weaponization. It's been weaponized like it's never been. This is for third world countries. This isn't for us. Biden ought to drop all of these things. And frankly, he may do better if he does, because people would say, wow, that was very reasonable. Look, they're all, the state, the city, and the federal, they're all coordinated. Fannie Willis's lover spent hours and hours at the White House, I guess with White House counsel and with DOJ, plotting out this plan. Nobody talks about that. They're all coordinated with the White House. It's weaponization. Never been done in this country. It's been done in third world countries, banana republics, never in this country. So I really believe what they should do is really go all the way, go out and stop all of this nonsense. They're nonsense cases, and everybody sees it. You just look at Atlanta. It's such an embarrassment to Georgia, what's happening there. But Jack Smith, I don't think is any better. Letitia James is terrible. She campaigned on, I will get Trump, and then it goes before a Trump-hating judge. I mean, the whole thing is a rigged deal, and the public understands it. I'm lucky that I'm able to explain it to the public, because if you weren't able to explain it, the public wouldn't know. They'd believe what they see. So I don't want to win this way. Look, I want to win based on my policies are better. We're going to cut taxes. We're going to get interest rates down. You're going to be able to buy homes again. I mean, you can't buy a home today. The interest rates are so high. I want to win on safe borders. I want to stop wars. I want to stop the war in Ukraine with Russia. I want to stop what's happening in Israel. Israel would have never been attacked if I were president. Ukraine would have never, ever been attacked if I was president. You wouldn't have had inflation. Inflation was caused by high energy prices. I had low energy prices. I would have kept them there very easily. And it probably maybe caused the war with Ukraine, because Putin became rich all of a sudden. It went up so much, and I watched President Biden talking about Putin. Putin became very rich because at $100 a barrel, he's got so much money to fight a war. At $40 a barrel, he doesn't have the money to fight a war. But he wouldn't have done it anyway because I told him not to. So I just want to thank all of you for being here. I think it's a very big day for America. I think it's a very big day for liberty, and I think it's just a great day for this country. Again, I hope it's unifying like I think, but it is. It's a big step toward unification. I hope that the justices, because they'll be working on some other cases, but one in particular, presidents have to be given total immunity. They have to be allowed to do their job. If they're not allowed to do their job, it's not what the founders wanted, but perhaps even more importantly, it will be terrible for our country. Thank you all very much.
And with that, he is out. Oh my goodness. I thought he might go longer with the questions. So just a brief statement from Donald Trump there, basically saying that this is a terrific day. It's helping to bring unity to America, unity which is very badly needed right now. The president also making the point that, you know what? Presidents should be free as they go forward. If they do a good job, that should be celebrated. They shouldn't be indicted as he's been indicted so many times. He shouldn't have to deal with the sort of pain of the political system. He made a reference to how this is very Latin America or Banana Republic-like, or happens in other nations, but not in ours. And that's very true. I mean, some of you know this. I started my career as a sovereign debt market analyst covering emerging debt markets, specifically Argentina, Venezuela, Brazil, and Mexico. And so my job was to sort of assess, in part, the credit risks as we were trading these bonds. Kind of like, if you traded treasuries, you're trading the treasury equivalents, if you would, in some of these crazy countries. And in these crazy countries, what made it kind of perhaps exciting from an analyst standpoint was just you never knew what they were going to do next, right? But I always thought to myself, oh, isn't this great? This is not America, right? America, we don't do this kind of stuff. And yet this is exactly what they do there in Venezuela.
Given how you
or
see
in
this
Argentina
case,
or
given
some of those
how a
places.
number
Argentina's
of
gotten a little better as of late,
independent
but,
and
Milei
some
had to
Republican
win by a whopping
voters in your
12%. He had to win by so much because otherwise they would have picked apart that particular election as well. And so again, Donald Trump coming out, making a brief statement saying that, this is indeed a very unifying thing, that he's appreciative of how the Supreme Court voted on this, but he's a little perturbed that he has to go through everything else. What is it, 91 counts that he's been indicted on, ladies and gentlemen? 91 counts. Think about that. And think about the waste of time. Think about the waste of money. He did bring up Letitia James, who thinks that somehow she knows the valuation of his properties better than Deutsche Bank, who's lending to him, would actually know. And now, as a result, he's going to pay $500 million. The Secretary of State in Colorado, is this lady mad? This lady's mad because she feels that she had every right as a little lonely state to actually say, you know what, we're gonna come through and just ambush the whole system, and we're gonna make it so that nobody can vote for Trump because we feel so passionately against him that we're going to decide everything for the rest of the country. Let's listen to this woman. I think we've got this up ready to go, who's just so clearly, frankly, a narcissist living in her own world. It should just revolt you. Here we go.
Given how you see this case, given how a number of independent and some Republican voters in your state, the ones who brought this case, see Donald Trump, as you said, an oath-breaking insurrectionist. What do you make of the voters in your state across the country that still believe that he should be president and that he's still qualified to be president?
Ultimately, that will be a voter's decision. I think there's a lot of reason for voters to look really hard at this upcoming election. And what we have seen in swing states, swing districts, that in 2018, 2020, and 2022, American voters have stepped up to safeguard American democracy. Look, this upcoming election will have a big impact on our fundamental freedoms. The idea that women should have control over our own bodies, the idea that our democracy should remain intact, and some really basic agreement among Americans will be affected in this upcoming election. What I hope for is that Americans pay really close attention, and I am immensely hopeful and optimistic that, again, democracy will remain intact and this country will have centuries ahead of us with a strong representation.
Do you have confidence in the Supreme Court?
I would say as an office holder, it is my job to uphold the decision of the United States Supreme Court. And that's why I've always said from the beginning of this litigation that I'll follow what the United States Supreme Court decides, even if I disagree with them, which I do. I think the Supreme Court has issued bad decisions on democracy. I think what's happening in this country for American women is horrendous. The idea that the overturning of Roe is leading to women not even being able to access fertility treatment in the state of Alabama. And overall, again, the United States Supreme Court decision will not be the make it or break it as to whether democracy survives. The make it or break it will be the American people. And that's who I have the utmost confidence and trust in.
Do you think this court is partisan?
I think this court has had, obviously, some pretty big issues. Whether it has been, Clarence Thomas's wife's role, gifts that have gone unreported, and there are some pretty big decisions that have come out of the court that I highly disagree with, and I think strip Americans of our basic human rights and fundamental freedoms. With that said, we live in a country of rule of law. We have to respect the court's decisions while disagreeing with them. And honestly, I think that's something that MAGA Republicans could take a lesson from. It's okay to disagree with decisions in one another and not turn into violent rhetoric and attempts to steal elections. You win cases, you lose cases, just like elections. And what we need Donald Trump to understand is that there are losers and winners in elections. And if you lose an election, that does not mean it's stolen from you. And that does not give you the ability to have incite an assault on the United States Capitol and the country.
Colorado Secretary.
Wow. Okay, Jenna. Like I said, a total narcissist. Look, she told us that she thinks the Supreme Court is making bad decisions on democracy, that she doesn't have faith in the Supreme Court, but that she does have faith in the American people. If she had faith in the American people, then what the heck is she doing saying, we're going to take this guy off the ballot? That's not how it works. If you have faith in the American people, then you allow them to vote for whoever it is that they want to vote for, even if that person is not on your side. Okay, Jenna? Okay, lefties? And this is indeed the entire problem of this moment. We heard from Donald Trump talking about not just this particular case, but of course the Letitia James case, as well as the Fani Willis case. Fani Willis, who goes out and hires this guy that allegedly she's seeing. And believe me, if you see all the texts that are going back and forth and how many times he's visiting her house, clearly there was something going on. I mean, something, right? But this is what's being disputed, because you see, the issue here on Fani is she can't actually hire her boyfriend and then financially benefit from that relationship while they're going after Trump. And there were all those cruises, which she says she paid cash for, etc. Let's listen to The View try and defend Fani Willis here just today, in fact, because somehow, this is what they're holding on to. They keep holding on to all these cases, hoping that one of them's going to come through. But again, the biggie there out of Colorado in the Supreme Court is just a big fat zero. Here, watch this Anna woman on The View talking about Fani.
He was, when he was running for president, back when dinosaurs were roaming the earth, Ron DeSantis actually at one point said, I'm actually looking at this in Florida now. Could we make a credible case that Biden should be removed because of whatever? Reason he can come, and that could be happening, as you said, in every other state. Now, it's really important that we remember, though, they ruled on this question. They did not rule on whether he is an insurrectionist. No. They did not rule on whether he helped lead an insurrection and promote an insurrection. Those are two very separate questions. I agree with this. I think it needs to be up to the voters. I think it was opening up a Pandora's box. And one of the things that John Roberts said earlier was, how do we know that this is not that then elections don't end up being decided by just a few states? But the last point I want to make, something that's really troubling me, though. Look, we have spent days in the last few weeks watching Fani Willis be on a witness stand and going through the fact that she was having an affair with a guy she hired to prosecute this case. It's a conflict of interest case. It bothers me tremendously that we have now had this case where Clarence Thomas has sat there, and we have another case, the immunity case, where Clarence Thomas apparently plans to sit there, despite the fact that, in my view, and I think in a lot of Americans' view, he has a conflict of interest, because if Fani Willis sleeping with that guy you think was a conflict of interest, what do you think of Clarence Thomas being married to a woman who was actually trying to overturn the elections? And that is something that continues to be unaddressed. And I must say this, both Clarence and Jenny Thomas have denied any wrongdoing.
Well, whoa. Think about that. There's a few different things going on, because basically what she's saying is a wife cannot have a different viewpoint than her husband. That somehow you have to think completely in sync. You want to talk about a sexist point of view? That's coming from The View right there, ladies and gentlemen. That because Clarence Thomas is married to a woman that feels passionately that Donald Trump is on the right side of history here, that somehow Clarence Thomas cannot think straight because of who his wife is, that he's been married to for decades. Last I checked, a husband and wife are supposed to be able to have different views on things Anna, right? I mean, you guys purport to be the feminists that you are there over on The View, but you see, they're only feminists when it suits their point of view, suddenly become really kind of arcane and anti-feminist and anti-women if they figure it's against their point of view. Now, I thought one direction she might actually go in is that, maybe Clarence Thomas has a conflict of interest because he's gotten money from, some friend who flies him here, there, and everywhere. That was a legit thing. And then he, the issues were coming up before the court. That was fully legit, but different than this particular case. I mean, the problem with Fannie here is that, well, she's going out and hiring the boyfriend and then benefiting financially from that hiring as they try to take down Trump. And I have a feeling this whole thing, the judge is going to probably wind up deciding, Fannie, you can't move forward in this case because you are so highly, highly, highly conflicted. And then they're going to wipe her out. They're going to wipe out the whole office. And then they're not going to be able to take that Fulton County, Georgia case right to court the way they want. It gets delayed, and it will get delayed till after the election. So I want to play you a funny clip from Donald Trump over the weekend. He was at a rally and he had some things to say about Fannie and her 2000 text from Nathan. Funny.
I was indicted by Fannie in Georgia. Fannie. How did that work out? And her lover, Nathan Wade. And they hired him for almost $1 million because of his great, great experience. Of course, he didn't have any experience. He had experience in something else. You know that. A lot of experience. And at that, I'm quite sure he was very good based on the fact that she called him 2,000 times. I didn't know the gentleman. I didn't know him. Oh, you have 2,000 phone calls, 3,500 text messages. How is it possible? I know a lot of people. We like a lot of people. I happen to have a very good relationship with a woman called Melania. But I would venture to say in all the years that I've known her, I might not have called her 2,500 times. I know I didn't send 3,500 text messages.
Okay. He's funny. I mean, he actually really does have a good sense of humor. Yeah, I mean, 2,000 or 3,000 text messages, that seems kind of excessive to me. Does it not seem a little excessive to you? But, what that was about, I don't think I even want to know. Okay, let's start there. I don't even want to know. But Fannie is not going to be able to continue in that gig. I mean, I would be shocked if they decide that she's going to be able to move forward. So consequently, that thing's going to fall really, really flat on its face as well. I mean, it's like one after another. I mean, the only thing they got right now is the $500+ million verdict, because they get a super biased judge that just kind of hates his guts, along with Letitia James trying to pull her little stunt there. So that's what they've got against him right now. That's the only thing, but that's going to go to the appellate court. And I guarantee it's going to get overturned
President Biden,
in the appellate court.
Close
That's
the
just
borders
the reality
now.
of it. I mean, there's no
This is
judge
not
that's gonna be
sustainable
like, okay, we're going to have the state intervene in a business relationship like this. I mean, he might get hit with something just because I think he inflated the square footage on his apartment or on Mar-a-Lago or one of these things. And so they may say, okay, well, you can't really do that. But there's no way. You know how like the verdict is supposed to actually fit whatever the alleged crime was in this case? Even if you assume that he's guilty, there's no way that you're going to come out and say, yeah, it was actually $500 million that we should penalize this guy with. He offered $100 million. They're like, nope, we don't want it. They wouldn't even do the stay order for 30 days. So I don't know exactly where that's standing right now, but that's kind of critical in this moment in time. Let's play you a quick clip. We just heard from the President of the United States, former President of the United States, who is in the running big time. He is the leading candidate right now to become not just the Republican nominee, but the next president in 2024, because he's way ahead in every single poll, every single which way you look at it. Let's hear from President Trump speaking at Mar-a-Lago, reacting, ladies and gentlemen, to that massive news. Unanimous 9-0 out of the Supreme Court, telling Colorado, no go, guys. You know what? You can't actually keep him off the ballot after all.
The other thing I say to President Biden, close the borders now. This is not sustainable for our country. It's not sustainable for our cities. Our country is under siege. This is a violent thing that you've done. And many people are dying. Many people are dying. They die on the trip up. They die going through the border. And they die in our country.
And of course, that was actually him talking about the border itself. This is indeed the number one issue right now in America. I've showed you the polls. Gallup came out the other day showing how Americans feel so strongly about this that it's now up 8 points. It was just a short time ago, 4 weeks ago, that Americans said that this was a big issue. It was 20% ruled that this was the number one issue. Now it's up to 28%. And after that, you've got government as a big issue, because I think they see government as completely overstepping itself, like way out of bounds. Like, what the heck is this government doing? And so between that and the economy being what it is, I don't see how Joe Biden is going to be able to do it again. On top of that, even the New York Times is admitting how bad it's getting. Maybe some of you saw this over the weekend. There was just a big story, and pretty devastating for the president, talking about age and how overall Americans really saw age as a huge problem for Joe Biden. So they see him as too old. And in some ways, it's not even age, right? Because Donald Trump isn't that many years. Was it 77 versus 81? It's just that he seems to be suffering a mental decline, and that's what people are picking up on. So I keep saying, I don't know how they run him. I just don't know how you run Joe Biden in this kind of environment. But I think the flip side of that is, how do you not run him? They don't like us talking about these things. Fox News was recently sent a note saying, hey, don't talk about the impeachment inquiry. Ian Sims has just been out on CNN doing the rounds saying, don't talk about these things. They don't want us talking about any of it. But the reality is this, ladies and gentlemen, there are some issues confronting the president, whether it be his age, whether it be his alleged involvement in some kind of pay-to-play type scheme vis-a-vis his son and Burisma Energy, where his son was collecting $83,000 a month, unheard of for a board position. Absolutely, positively crazy. And him saying to the CFR, Council on Foreign Relations, that he made sure that Victor Shokin got fired because he was corrupt, when in fact that was exactly what Burisma wanted to have happen, because Victor Shokin was investigating them. I mean, there are definitely some things that should be talked about, that could be talked about, but that the White House does not want you to talk about. And that puts us all in a kind of delicate position. Look, here's the reality though, and this is the good news. I'm here with you right now. We've got thousands of people watching this broadcast live, streaming. And there is a way for us to communicate, and there's a way for Donald Trump to communicate. They tried to take it away, right? Getting rid of Twitter, getting rid of other platforms for him, and then he went and started Truth Social, which looks like it's got a huge valuation. We'll see if that holds, but if so, hey, Letitia James, that little 500 million thing is going to be like a drop in the bucket if that in fact stays. He's got a 78% stake in it. But he made this point earlier today when speaking at Mar-a-Lago that, you know what? Hey, I can talk to you and I can get the story out. Imagine if I couldn't. And so that's a really good thing. He's able to go direct to the people. But again, I want to just go back and listen to Donald Trump reacting at Mar-a-Lago to the Supreme Court's decision. Pretty monumental, historic stuff. Here we go.
Decision were very well crafted, and I think it will go a long way toward bringing our country together, which our country needs. And they worked long, they worked hard, and frankly, they worked very quickly on something that will be spoken about 100 years from now and 200 years from now. Extremely important. Essentially, you cannot take somebody out of a race because an opponent would like to have it that way. And pretty incredible stuff. Listen, I am so glad you're here. I'm so glad we have this opportunity to connect on these live streaming platforms. If you haven't, subscribe, like, share, make a comment. I tell you this, guys, and I'm not kidding. I read all the comments, even on all the little clips. So make a comment. Do me that favor. We are living together through history. We are on the front lines here. This is massive. Never before has the Supreme Court had to weigh in on something like this. This is, in fact, what they did today. Ladies and gentlemen, consider yourself a witness to history. The Supreme Court voting 9-0 that Donald Trump can be on the ballot. Colorado and any other state that comes along has no right to kick him off. Hear, hear. Long live America. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see you tomorrow.